Mark, welcome till 10 to 1. I hope this finds you well.
I'm very well. How are you?
Very well indeed.
Good.
So to kick off, can you fill us in about your target audience and what Workplace Insight is all about?
Okay. Well, we set up about 7 years ago, and the objective was to look at workplaces from a broader perspective. So as well as the office, to have a look at the digital workplace and also the cultural space, which is why our strap line is people, places and technology, and people first. So and we've become aware of the fact that the kind of conversations people were having about offices were different, and also about the people who were holding those conversations were different too. So traditionally, it's been about surveyors, architects, designers, facilities managers, and so on and so forth. But increasingly, people who work in professions like HR and technology were making decisions about physical offices as well as cultural spaces. So we wanted to represent this new, well, it's not a profession, but it's kind of a discipline of workplace management. So we started having that conversation. I mean, we weren't the first people to do that. I mean, we always have to acknowledge there are people who saw this coming, and some of them saw it coming 25, 30 years ago. So our audience is a mixture of people. We have about 80,000 readers a month. We have primarily readers in the UK and North America, and thereafter people in Australia and increasingly India. You know, we have a decent Indian readership as well. So the English-speaking world, essentially, so we publish typically about 5 stories a day, and more recently maybe 3. And we've got very good at SEO, even though I say it myself. So we attract people that way, but also through communications through social media and our newsletter. So we come at them from all directions, essentially.
Yeah, perfect. So in terms of, I mean, obviously from a workplace perspective, things have changed massively over the last few months. How have things changed for you, and what have you been looking at doing differently that you were doing, you know, from what you're doing back in sort of Jan, Feb?
Well, essentially, I mean, the mainstream conversation about all of these things is something we've been covering for years in any case. So we, we're not really ourselves talking about this in any particularly new way. I think the problem is that most people are having very, very similar conversations. So most of the information we're getting in terms of surveys and reports and news, but also ideas for commentary and so on and so forth, is what the Americans would call cookie cutter stuff. You know, it's all essentially the same.
Yeah.
And it's always been one of our goals is not to just repeat the same stuff as everybody else. And so it's made our lives a little bit more difficult. And so we don't really publish a huge amount of stuff that people can find easily elsewhere. So that's our goal, is to it's not rising above it, but just have a different conversation to the rest of the world. So a slightly different conversation.
So with that in mind, I mean, from the PR industry perspective, can you give some pointers of the kind of stories, content, press releases that would be of interest at this moment in time?
Well, I can tell you what we don't want more easily than what we do want. We don't want stuff that's tips for working from home. We don't want stuff about the death of the office. We don't want sort of returning to office stuff. I mean, I on that last point, I have to acknowledge, of course, that people do have to have these conversations. So firms, you know, if they're design firms or facilities firms or property firms, they have to have these conversations with their clients. But we kind of think there's so much of that stuff around at the moment that we have to let them have it in a different platform. So although it's an important conversation, and although we've covered it to a certain extent, we can't actually get into every single example of that. So we're not covering that, but for slightly different reasons than, for example, the tips for working from home, which I just find a bit tedious and actually quite obvious. A lot of them, it's look after yourself, drink plenty of water, get some sleep, turn off your device at 6 o'clock, those sorts of things. And I don't think people need to be endlessly sort of bombarded with that kind of stuff.
So the story is more about how the office environment and the home office environment will integrate. Is that more of interest?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I think I mean, I think people are starting to come to a sort of more sophisticated understanding of what's going to emerge from this. I mean, people are still repeating this stuff about the death of the office, for example. That's fine, they can do that. But what's essentially going to emerge is a different balance between people's domestic working lives and the ones that they have in the office, and that will change the function of the office. And we want to reflect that and say, actually, you're not just swapping out one form of work for another form of work. Actually, you're creating more of a blend of different forms of work. And I think that the challenge will be to have nuanced conversations about those and informed conversations about how that will work in practice. When do you decide to go into the office? When do you decide to stay home? Those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Having the support from the firm in terms of culture and technology and so on to allow you to do that. And though that's where it's interesting, it's how firms do that. And I think also, that I'd like to hear from PR firms to discuss how it works differently for different types of people, for different types of firms, and so on. So we're not expecting also that everybody's going to be working in exactly the same way, and nor should they. I think there are some general principles you can establish, but it's important to think about the different experience of a 25-year-old working in a creative capacity in the centre of London, and an accountant working in a small town in the Midlands. Their experience of work will be very different, and it should be.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So, I mean, just for your sales, how have you seen it change, over the last couple of months in terms of your deadlines? You recently launched your June magazine. How was that affected by everything that was going on? How did you have that?
Well, it didn't really. I mean, it's in motion anyway. I mean, obviously these things have some momentum, and we're just putting the third issue together at the moment as well. So they have their own momentum. So I think the difficulty is like not being able to sit down and record things like the podcasts that we use and go and visit these sites that we're covering. So those all have to be done virtually at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a bit more difficult. But apart from that, I don't think it's necessarily affected us that much in terms of work. We've always had a flexible working arrangement here, so people may or may not come into the office on different days. I think we're just we're living the dream already. And I kind of think it's kind of it's not really affected us in terms of how we get things done. The biggest difficulty is being able to publish fewer stories than we normally would.
Mm-hmm.
Because people are only having one conversation at the moment, and that's fine. But we're looking forward to them coming up with different stuff. Talk about normal things. I think we've got a ban already on the phrase new normal.
Mm-hmm.
So if anybody comes to us with an idea about the new normal, it will immediately be marked down. But that having been said, we have to say, well, some of the things will be the same. We're still people. Mm-hmm. And there are some things that are going to be consistent, and we'd like to hear a lot more about those sorts of things. That would be very refreshing.
Okay, lovely. Well, that's good for everyone to know. You just mentioned that you're putting your third magazine together. Yep. What are the deadlines for getting stuff to you for that?
Well, yeah, we've got everything commissioned pretty much. So there is some scope for sort of news stories in there. Mm-hmm. And also there's always scope for advertising if people want to contact us about that. That runs up right until publishing date. But at the moment. But I think we're publishing every 2 months, so there's always plenty of scope going forward. We're happy to have conversations with people about that. Mm-hmm. And we want to talk about things in a sophisticated way, so there's always plenty of scope for people to sort of suggest commentary, case studies, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things we're trying to do with it is also link to things like podcasts and film through the pages of the magazine using QR codes.
Yeah.
So we want to have it. I don't know if it's interactive, but anyway, it's sort of multi-layered, mm-hmm. so people can dig into things a little bit more.
Lovely. I'm conscious we've got 30 seconds or so of our 10 minutes.
Okay.
One final question in terms of what have the good PRs sent you?
Blimey. To be honest, I think that that's not really changed for us. It's that sort of consistent thing that sticks with our values. I mean, we've got a set of very, very strict guidelines for contributors on the website, which we encourage people to read. But I think essentially it's to say something that's not been said before, or if it has been said before, to try and say it in a new way, so that it sort of entices people. And that's it. It's about creating something engaging. So it's one of the reasons why we don't like how-to pieces, not only because they tend to form a business case for a product or service, but also because those sorts of things are done very, very well elsewhere, and we feel like we can do something different.
Lovely. Well,
I don't know if I've answered your question there. I really don't.
Well, I think you did. I mean, it was talking about, you basically want something more imaginative and not competitive. Yeah,
if you've seen it before, it's likely that we're going to look at it with a jaded eye, and it's and I think also it's not just about a new idea; it's about illustrating a point in a new way. Because some of the conversations are very, very mundane. I know it's not always the PR industry's fault about these things. Sometimes, there are other influences on that. But I think as far as we're concerned, just be interesting. And at
this moment in time, it's good for the PR industry to know that. So that's why these formats are very useful and give that information.
Okay.
So that's lovely. Well,
thank you.
Thank you for your time today, and look forward to catching up again soon.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much.